Hello, in this video, we're going to go over fine typography. I'll give you a crash course on how to handle all of this in InDesign. So the first thing we're going to talk about is spacing your lines of type. The first thing we should be familiar with is kerning. Um, Typically, we reserve kerning. So kerning, right? Space between two characters of type. We know that. We reserve kerning to larger specimens of type. So that means our header and subheader. Sometimes our pull quotes might need to be kerned, but typically I'm not going to ask my students to kern bodies of text. That's crazy. That would be very exhausting, and we probably wouldn't notice the difference otherwise. But where a type is big and loud and eyes are on it and drawn to it, that's where we need to be very conscious of the space between every single character. So reserve it for headers, subheaders, that kind of stuff. The way we edit our kerning, we'll use our type tool, and then we'll just place the cursor between two characters. In this case, let's say I think that the N and A are spaced too far apart. I'll just go to the value of kerning here. You'll see it's right below the size. And I could just use the arrow keys up and down, and you can see it starts to adjust automatically. That's nice. In the case that you have your whole text frame selected, and you notice that the value of kerning changes, right? Uh, so what does it mean, optics or optical metrics? What's the difference between these two things? Well, if you downloaded your typeface from a reputable source, like a Type Foundry or, like Monotype or Adobe Fonts, they have really good quality control. They make sure that their type designers are designing these typefaces with consideration of how they're going to be used, and they're building into these softwares what we call kerning tables. And the kerning table is literally just like, okay, they paired N next to every other character in that whole typeface, and they made sure it's spaced correctly. And then they went to M and they spaced that next to every character correctly. Some places will not do this. If you're downloading it from free fonts, websites, whatever, they have less quality control. That means the spacing between each character might be varied or just set to like a standard space, kind of similar to like a monospace typeface. That means that there's going to be some wonkiness to it that we have to be conscious of. So typically, if I know that I got my typeface from a good place, I will opt for metrics. That means that I'm choosing to rely on what the designer built into this typeface. If I don't trust the designer or I don't know where I got the typeface from, I will opt for optical. That means I'm going to let the computer decide on how this should be spaced out, and it'll just mathematically give me the average space that it deems appropriate. So that's how you should use that. Uh, Tracking. If kerning is the space between two individual characters, tracking is the space between the whole line. So you can see if I then select a paragraph of text and I am going to adjust the tracking, understand the implication this has. You could make your paragraphs of type feel very loose and open and light. So now if you compare these two paragraphs, right? This one with higher tracking feels a lot lighter and a lot more spread out than this one. This feels dense and heavier. That's not always a good thing though. It makes it harder to read when it's tracked out so far. So for paragraphs, I try to keep it, within the 25 point value. For headers, it's much less important. We'll read those regardless. So if you set this to like 100, that's fine. We'll still read that just fine. But did you notice what happened between my F and an I when I opened the tracking so far? So let's do that again. So I have 0, and then watch the F and the I. As I increase, it snaps. You see that? So what this is called, so this exact example is called a finial, but we have ligatures. Ligatures are typefaces when you have two characters that have an awkward spacing. So in the case of the F and the I, uh, where the tittle of the I meets the stem of the stem, whatever, type anatomy. That's fun. Um, there's a weird spacing, and so the type designer said, you know what, we can make this into a ligature. We'll replace that pair with one symbol. This can be wonky. You have to watch these. specifically when you start changing the spacing, because sometimes they don't break. And if you have one symbol that's supposed to be two letters and then all your other letters are spaced out far, it reads clunky. So just be conscious of your ligatures where they exist and how to address them. If you don't want to use ligatures at all, under your character panel, this menu, you could just uncheck ligatures and it will remove all of them. I like them though because they seem fancy and that's kind of fun. Something else to be conscious of is your alignment. So each of these paragraphs or columns of text, body copy, they're set to flush left, rag right. What does that? What do those terms mean? Flush left means that all the lines of type are going to be aligned on the left. Rag right means I have this uneven jagged edge on the right, whereas flush right, rag left is the opposite. Let me see that. Play with justification, or alignment rather. I would say 95% of the time you're gonna choose either left aligned text or justified text. So something that looks like this or something that looks like this, where just both left and right aligned. That's called justified. That is this value here under your paragraph. Like I said, that covers about 90 to 95% of all examples of us having read anything ever, which is kind of cool. I do have a lot of students that feel obligated when they have typed, it sits up against like the rightmost edge of a page, that they would want to right align, flush right, rag left. Your readers have lizard brains, and that's unavoidable. Anybody that was trained on English, a sort of like read left to right style of writing, our eyes automatically want to look for a consistent starting point when reading lines of text. That means as I start reading this gibberish, I'm going to go from the R to the D to the O and then all the way to the B. And you can see this sort of like jagged start. That will fatigue your readers. That makes our eyes exhausted. That means our stamina as we have to read pages of text is going to be a lot lower than if it was just simply this, which is sort of what we've been trained on and what we expect. So because of that relationship, know your readers, understand the relationship that we have with reading left to right. And it means that we sort of want this consistency. Another thing you should be conscious of is the space, how you, space out your paragraphs or differentiate between blocks of text. So in this example, you could see I put space between my paragraphs. So if I go to my paragraph menu, you can see space after is given 1/4 of an inch. If I set that to 0, now it's a little bit harder to differentiate where my paragraphs start. Well, one way that we could do that is with indentation. So we have these things called indents and outdents. You've probably never heard of an outdent, but all of us should know what an indent is. The way we add these values to our paragraphs. So I'll select both paragraphs or both columns just so you can see what's going to happen. This second value, first line left indent, we're just going to increase it. You'll get to watch what happens. I feel like that's obvious. But now you can see it signifies breaks in paragraphs pretty easily. If you liked it better before with just space between paragraphs, that is this value here. So you could add some space. Couple rules that we generally abide by. Again, we have lizard brains. We only need one signifier to know the difference or the breaks between paragraphs. So I would generally say do one or the other. Either do an indent or do a space, but don't do both, because it looks a little clunky. It adds a bunch of weird space that you don't necessarily anticipate or you don't know how to accommodate. So I would say either do space after or indents, but not both. Okay, now what is an outdent? I ask like anybody can answer while watching a video. An outdent is exactly the opposite of an indent. So our inclination is going to be, oh, well, if I just added a value here, then I'll just drop the value there. But you'll immediately see we can't do that. We can't put text outside of a text frame because InDesign won't let us. So what do we have to do? We have to be a little bit hacky about it. So we actually have to add space to the left of the whole paragraph and then pull the first lines back. So in that first value, it's going to be your whole left indent. We'll up that some value. So let's say 1/4 of an inch. And now we could pull the first line back 1/4 of an inch. Again, you can't go higher than your actual left indent for the whole paragraph. But that would be called an outdent. And that's kind of cool. Generally speaking, we don't like to apply whatever rules we're using to differentiate paragraphs to the first paragraph on the page because, again, we're kind of smart. We know what the first paragraph is, right? So if that was the case, then you could also do this in your paragraph styles, but I'm just showing you through here just for a quick example. If you're going to differentiate with indentation, then the first paragraph on the page doesn't need to be indented because we're smart. We know that. Okay, now let's just set this all back to regular. Here we go. This is what we were working with in the beginning. Let's talk about what rags are. I know flush left rag. Sorry, my Siri just turned on. The rag is this sort of weird space that happens on the opposite side of your flush. We have a definition of what makes a good rag. Again, lizard brains. We want evenness, we want balance, we want order. This means visually the space or the shapes that are kind of made with this negative space of our rag could be distracting. So where I have 3 lines that sort of align, and then I have this DEL that sort of breaks that, and then I get this weird organic shape that's happening. Down here, I have like this roundness happening, and down here I have this weird like right angle jarring into the paragraph. We don't love that. Typically, we would define a good rag by alternating. So it'd be like a long line, long, short, long, short, long, short. Again, that is a hint at where our eyes should go next, and it creates balance. It really optimizes legibility, which is our whole goal here. Body copy is supposed to be purely functional. We're supposed to just be able to read it and take what we need to from the text. So how do we go about making this rag great? One of the first things that we should talk about is hyphenation. So under our paragraph panel, you'll see here, hyphenate is checked. That's a good thing. If I uncheck it, it makes my rag a lot worse, and you'll see that. So we'll turn it back on. But I want to open up my paragraph panel, or paragraph styles, double click on the body, and we talked about this before, but we have the option under paragraph styles for hyphenation. And hyphenation, obviously what hyphenation does, it breaks up sort of longer words into 2 words with a hyphen between so that they could break the lines and kind of give us more wiggle room to optimize spacing. And you could see the sort of values that we're playing between. You could either have better spacing or fewer hyphens. And so we want to exist somewhere between these 2 values, right? So if we have better spacing, what does this do? Well, it gives us a ton of hyphens versus fewer hyphens, worse spacing. So I would say play with this scale, slide it up and down to see what happens. I try to keep it somewhere between like the middle 5 ticks, generally the middle 3. But whatever works for you. But you could also start playing with these values right here. So we have all of these like hyphenate with words with at least 5 letters. If we drop this to 4, then that means that it's going to hyphenate smaller words. Whereas if I increase it to like 7 or 8, it's only going to apply to the larger words. Before or after what letters in the word, hyphen limit. This value is very important for us because typically we don't ever want to go higher than 3 for a column of text. 3 hyphens is sort of the general maximum. if we go larger than that, then all of a sudden our eyes are drawn to why there are so many hyphens on a page where like let's bump this up to 10 just to see what happens. Oh, nothing happened. I must think it's really good. But yeah, I say keep it around 3. See what we can get away with that. So that's how we do hyphenation. I played with my hyphenation and I noticed that my rag still looks kind of jagged. The next step I'm going to do is truly, I'm just going to play with the width of my text frame. So I'll just kind of pull this out to see if it fixes it. And it did fix a lot of it, right? So like this is now, I would say, pretty good, at least close to good. I still have an orphan down here. Remember, orphans are individual words that are dropped to a single line. Disruptive. I would also count these 2 words as an orphan just because they're so short. So how do we fix this? We start playing with all of our tools. One thing I like to do is use a soft return or a manual line break. So the way we achieve that, text tool, place it before the space that's weird. So like, let's say I'm saying that this space right here is strange. I might drop nam to the next line just to see what happens. I don't love that. Gave me like this weird triangle. Um, what happens if I drop EOS? So I'm using shift return to drop lines to the next line. And you'll see the difference between shift return, which is that, and just regular return. Regular return is it creates a new paragraph, whereas shift return just drops stuff to the next line. So this paragraph specifically is going to require a little bit more attention. I can't get that space to kind of balance out just using hyphenation, the column width, because I don't want it to go too wide. I think that would be disruptive to my design, and I can't use soft returns. The next thing I'm going to play with is my tracking values. So with my character panel selected, I could start grabbing specific lines and adding space to the characters, right? And so let me bump this up to 5. And let me bump this up to 5. Automatically does 10 because I don't have the value set. So generally speaking, I don't like to increase my tracking more than 5, maximum 10, but I try to keep it within plus or minus 5. So like NAM, I might drop to like -5 just to see if that starts to balance out with this a little bit better. Because you're playing with the relationship between the characters at this point, and we don't necessarily want to ruin the legibility. So yeah, if it was the case that okay, this value went up to like 20, 30, all of a sudden that line of text feels way too fluffy. We want to sort of keep it somewhere within reason that a reader isn't going to notice a discrepancy, but the spacing feels a little bit better. So after tracking, we still notice that it's not perfect, and we want to play with one last thing. InDesign will actually let you increase the space between individual words. That's great. Uh, you notice when I was playing with the tracking that it was increasing by values of 10. We can actually adjust that. If we go to InDesign Preferences, Units, and Increments, so under this preference menu, we have keyboard increments. That means every time I click a button, it's shifting something. So when I'm playing with kerning and tracking, it is moving it 20 thousandths of an M. Let's just drop that down to 1 so I can play with it with very infinitesimal changes so I can have a very nuanced control over it. So I'll just click OK after I set that to 1. And now instead of playing with the space between the characters, I could play with the space between the words themselves. So this is achieved through a keyboard shortcut. The keyboard shortcut is a little bit clunky. If you're on a Mac, it's going to be Command, Option, backslash. So Command, Option, backslash is going to start increasing the space between the words. And it does it at 1/1000th of an EM. So it's going to be very small at first, but you can see the space between the words is increasing. I'll do it to this line as well. So Command Option backslash. And then if I decided like, oh no, this, it's gone too far, I'll select that type. Command Option delete will start to remove the space again. If you're on a PC, that's going to be Control Alt backslash Control Alt backspace to change those values. But yeah, that is how you are able to achieve sort of a more balanced rag. It's still not perfect. This is one of those things where you designed all your type systems, you have your specimen perfect, you built it into all your paragraph styles, then you laid out all of your text in your book and your images and all the layouts are done. It's that sort of last fine-tooth comb that you want to approach and finesse your work so that it looks as best as possible. This is typically my last step of designing any sort of publication or type layout. So in the case that like, yeah, I still don't love this orphan, we can't have this orphan. We'll just come through and start playing with the spacing. I'll add space here. I'll probably drop some characters to try and get it to look right. And you notice I am ruining this now. Actually, that looks okay. This space sucks though. So yeah, once you have all your stuff laid out, if you're using left align text, then you need to sort of come through and play and finesse with your rags. This is a really good time to just like throw on some good music, make a pot of coffee, make a cup of tea, whatever, and just sort of vibe out. This is the sort of mindless work where you don't have to think too much. So it's kind of nice to just sort of zone out, focus on the negative space that your columns of type are making. If you are using justified type though, so we don't have any rags. So down here you'll see justified columns. We don't have any rags, but there is something that we need to be conscious of. So because we have left and right aligned type, that means it is automatically adding space to every single or between every single word so that there's enough space to span the gamut of a width of your column of text. You'll notice I have selected to use the justified, but the last line of type is left align. That is because if like, let me just show you real quick. If I just use full justified, which is this option over here on the right under the paragraph panel, full justified, look at how terrible that spacing is. That's because I'm giving it zero wiggle room. I'm telling it it has to fit this exact size, do whatever you have to. So specifically these three lines of text, terrible. We hate this. This is so bad. So what happens when I choose justified with the last line left aligned? What it's doing is it's saying this space here after the last line or the last word of the last line, this is the space that you can now disperse through the rest of the paragraph. So everything can be a little bit closer together. You could drop, you have the space to drop words. It is just nice wiggle room. Typically, I like to just use justified with last line left aligned. Something you have to be conscious of, though, are these things called white rivers. White rivers are the unexpected consequence of having space after space after space line up on paragraphs of text. So you can see on this paragraph specifically, I have a nice river that goes right here. And you can start to see these everywhere as you start to look for them, basically. Um, they're a real bummer and they're hard to fix. But it's the cost of not having to play with a rag, right? So if you were to want to fix them, this is the case where we would just sort of follow all the steps that we just did, right? So we could start playing with hyphenation. So under paragraph, you'll notice the difference immediately if you up or down hyphenation. And then hyphenation will be under paragraph styles. You could mess with that hyphenation. If hyphenation doesn't work for you, then we can again start playing with column width. So what happens if I drop the column a little bit? You'll start to see it takes care of some of the space issues. or the white rivers. Like that already starts to look a little bit better. It's a little loose down here at the bottom, but the top is kind of managed. You can start playing with the manual line breaks, right? So typically, like let's say I don't like how spaced out this is. Uh, I'll go to the line before or two lines before and start doing soft returns and dropping words down to see what happens. Turns out that the computer was right, I was wrong, and I made it worse. My bad. And then again, yeah, you can play with tracking. So you could grab this line, go over to your tracking panel and characters, increase that. Again, I wouldn't go above 5. And then you could also play with word space. So the word space is just gonna like add or subtract the spacing between the words. It's a little bit more nuanced with justification, but typically, yeah, you just wanna kind of resolve the white rivers. And then once you feel like you're good, your final check for all of your paragraphs across your whole document should be, does your rag look good? Is it making a weird negative space shape? Uh, do we need to fix that? Do you have any orphans or widows? Do you have any individual words that come at the end of a paragraph or in two columns of text? Do you have any sort of like abandoned lines of text that are just floating out in space? That's a widow. Um, how's your hyphenation? Is it good? Are there too many hyphens? Is it distracting? Do you need to adjust that? So those are all the things that you should sort of be playing with as you um, kind of go through your document for the last time. And then the last thing I want to talk to you about in this video, I know it's long, my apologies, just put me on 2x. I should have said that at the beginning, but who cares? Here we are. Um, hanging punctuation, quotation marks, and your dashes. So what is hanging punctuation? If you notice in this header type, let's say this is a quote. We are too respectful to this quotation mark. And by that, I mean, it shouldn't be sort of the start of our paragraph here. We don't care about that. The start of our paragraph is this F. That means we want this quotation mark, this left quote, to sort of exist somewhere outside so that the paragraph itself feels a lot more balanced. The way we achieve this is with hanging punctuation, and you'll find that under type. So I'll select the paragraph, I'll go type. It's under story. When I open story, you'll see I have this option for optical margin alignment. This means it's going to adjust for optics. Well, pow, check that, and then you're done, and you never think about it again. And now this space looks pretty good. So that's how we get the punctuation marks to sort of not have such weight to them. Because again, we don't respect quotation marks in this house. Absolutely not. Okay, now these quotation marks are good because it's a quote. However, these quotation marks, they don't make sense. So the curvy quotation marks, the standard, the sort of like you just hit quotation mark or shift quotation mark to get the double. Those are typographer's quotation marks. That means you're quoting something. If I'm trying to denote a measurement, such as like 10 foot 4 inches, we don't need curly ones. We need, they call them engineer quotes, they call them straight quotes. I don't call them anything. But where do we find them? There probably is a keyboard shortcut, but I just always go type, insert special character, quotation marks. And then for this case, we need a straight single quotation mark. Oh, there you go. Caret quote. And then for this one, I need type, insert special character, quotation marks, straight double. So that's how you achieve the measurements. So again, typographer's quotes, they're reserved for actual quotes. Straight quotes are reserved for measurements. And then in this case, 4 to 5, we are trying to denote with a hyphen a increment. So we want somewhere between 4 and 5 inches. This is strictly using a hyphen. If you are unfamiliar with our system of hyphenation in the English language, we have 3 that we typically use. Hyphens, which this is reserved for everything that we just talked about, which is breaking up a word into two words and understanding that now consonant, I don't speak Latin, is broken up into two words, and we understand because of this hyphen that those are connected. That's what a hyphen is. To denote increments, we need something called an en dash. So if you're unfamiliar, we have a dash, we have an en dash, and we have an em dash. So the three different dashes all do three different things. An en dash, if you hold Alt or Option on your keyboard and then hit dash, you'll get your en dash. Or you can also go type, insert special character, hyphens and dashes, en dash. You could also find these through the glyph panel. If you haven't looked at your glyph panel, it's type glyphs, and it will show you the whole character set of your typeface. And then if I just want to search for en, it'll give me my en dash there. And then I just double click it to add it to the line wherever it's active. So that's what an en dash is for. And then an em dash, this larger one, is to separate two fields of thought. So in this case, let's say I wanted to add, oh, get out of here. That's hilarious. To separate a thought, right? So you don't need to add spaces before or after the em dash. We typically just use it to break up two thoughts. So that's your quotation marks, that's your hyphenation, and that's how to get the punctuation sort of outside the text frame. Again, this is the final step of your project. This is the sort of finesse, the polishing to optimize legibility, to make sure that everything looks as possibly good as you can, whatever words. Yeah, so follow this video again if you need to. All the other videos will be linked throughout the course, but other than that, that's it. Good work, hopefully. And that's how I'll be grading you.